everyone. Welcome to Zero to Secure, where today I'm going to tell you about how we secured our Mac environment without much pain. I'm your speaker, John Malman. I've been a Mac admin for about 13 years now. I'm currently the Mac engineering lead for Leidos. Leidos is an international technology and research contractor, and we're actually one of the top 5 DoD contractors in the US, so pretty large company. So before we start, I want to set some expectations about what this presentation is and what it's not and what you're going to get out of it. This is not a highly technical presentation. I will be sharing some technologies that we use to get our devices up to compliance and some suggestions and scripts and tools, but I won't be taking a huge deep dive into them. This is more of a project management presentation. I will discuss how we plan the rollout and how we communicate it to users and how we scored various items, but if you were hoping for a big script to get compliant, I'm really sorry, you're still going to have to do the work. Now, that's out of the way. Very brief overview of the presentation. I'll go over background, why, what, and how we got here, planning stages, implementation of the plan, some lessons learned, and, well, whatever else. So first, some background, just so you can get a general scope of work in your mind. We had a simple goal. Literally, this was our simple goal. Ensure all Macs are secure and managed and secure. We needed to do this for various reasons, which I'll get into, but basically, we needed to get the thumbs up from cybersecurity for all the Macs in our environment. Thank you, Enroll. Speaking of those Macs, we believe we had anywhere from 400 to 700 Macs in the wild. What about 100 or so in Jamf already? Now, we didn't know who had these machines, but we did have ways to find them. I will be going into that. That was the task, the major task that we had to employ. We were asked to secure to NIST 800-171 with the eventual goal of CMMC level 3 or 4 in 12 months. Now, if you're not familiar with CMMC, that's fine. CMMC stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It's a unified standard for implementing cybersecurity across DoD and other government information systems. It's pretty new. Version 1.0 was released in January 2020. So CMMC level 3 is basically NIST on 800 with some added standards. Level 4 is where things get a little more difficult. Deep discussion is not in scope for this presentation, but I will include some links at the end if you're interested. Now, we needed to get this compliance to win contracts. So we're a defense contractor. Higher compliance means bigger, more contracts, which means more business, which ultimately means more money. We also wanted to do this to make life a lot easier for users and admins alike. Oh, there's also a typo in this slide. I didn't realize. I said 12 months there. It was actually 8 months. So it was a little bit of a task. So as you know, with Endpoint Compliance comes infrastructure compliance. The enterprise was already implementing some of these controls. I'm going to let you figure out which ones are real. You might be surprised. Managing these on unmanaged devices is kind of a nightmare for everyone involved. So getting control of all the devices allows for us to standardize, but to also meet those security standards. So it is a win-win for everybody. Now, mind you, these users have been around for a while. It's not like Macs were a new phenomenon at Leidos. They were kind of just ignored. And that's kind of how we got to this. This is what caused it. These go hand in hand, right? The legacy practices, legacy tools, and when they replace those legacy tools, they get ones that aren't Mac friendly. Well, things like this led to things that you would probably expect. Users are fending for themselves. Their business groups are making their own compliance guidelines, installing their own antiviruses or adding their own administrative users, putting controls in that usually don't make sense sometimes. And these new tools that they were getting, though, since they were not Mac friendly, they couldn't get supported, and the users just didn't like us. They didn't like IT because why would they? We're ignoring them. So that's how we got to this place. So we have some background, and okay, let's start producing a process to deploy these. But I want you to remember, if you're watching this, every environment is different. So what I talk about here might not work for you. I hope it does, but it might not work for you, but I hope it also gives you some direction. So keep that in mind. All right. With that in mind, we had to keep some things in mind on the information we gathered. So most of our Mac users are actually developers. They're very tech savvy. They're actually doing the work that keeps the company making money. So we didn't want to break the business. If the devs aren't able to use their computers, they can't deliver products to customers, and the customers won't pay us. So that's bad. So our idea was to secure the devices first and enhance things later, because we're going to have plenty of time, to enhance the service after it's secure. Now, based on this info, we decided, well, let's not erase the Macs. I could hear the groans from afar. This was a bit controversial, actually, internally as well. But we took the info from the last slide, made some pros and cons. I'll give you a moment to read these. But most of these are things you probably already know. We thought about them a good deal, actually, and my colleague and I both actually wanted to do different approaches. But in the end, I kind of swayed him. So we made some early decisions. Now we have a very, very general roadmap. So collect an inventory of machines, develop a schedule, tell the users, and then deploy and adjust. Overly simplified, but hey, it's a roadmap. So let's take a look at that first one. Find and enroll the machines. So we used a few methods to find them, and hopefully some of this will help you, because this really was something that we were happy that we had. We already had ABM in place, and we also had good purchase records. So we knew about a lot of these machines, most of them actually, but we still didn't know who had them. We had relative idea from the purchasing records, but that's about it. So what we did is we used infrastructure logs like VPN or antivirus. We also looked at our tickets, because people with Macs were still submitting tickets, so we knew where to find them. Now, we also used various methods because of this to enroll those devices. So we found who those users were, so we started putting out things in email, blog posts, newsletters, and we even decided to try to push from our AV server and corporate AV server to those users that had the AV installed. You'd be surprised how many we found. We found a good amount, but just some guidance if you're trying to find Macs. So once we started to get those machines in, we started an inventory of the software and hardware. We wanted to ensure the software was okay to keep on the systems, and kind of more importantly, we wanted to ensure that we're not going to install another layer of security suite on top of an already existing security suite. We're dropping a whole lot of security software, DoD, so we don't want to kill the machine. We wanted to see how the OS breakdown was. We were only going to support Mojave and Catalina at the time, but we did have systems coming in with 10.13 and 10.12, so we had to figure that out. As for hardware, we wanted to make sure the machines were good enough to run our security stack, but also ensure that the performance of the machine wouldn't be hit too bad once we dropped everything on it. And of course, wanted to make sure that they can run our minimum OS, and if not, retire them. Now, lastly, this one is a nice one. We wanted to see what the most popular model was. We would use this to determine which machines we would offer for purchase in our hardware catalog as a standard purchase. And spoiler alert, 15-inch MacBook Pro, by far, long shot, most popular model. So, all right, we have machines enrolling now. Great. We've got inventory being analyzed. Awesome. Now we want to figure out how to deploy the security settings and software updates. So, okay, we knew the baselines we're going to use. We had almost all of the software we're going to use already chosen. And why not just push a button to make everything compliant, right? Hit that make everything okay button. Well, we did do this for new users, new devices, excuse me. But for those existing ones, think of an iceberg, right? We see the tip and we're smart. We know there's something underneath there. But we're, how smart are we? Are we going to try to go around it, try to go through it? But we're not sure how much is hiding under there. So we push that button to deploy our settings and boom, everything shows up at once. We're underwater. Iceberg, it can sink ships. We don't want that to happen. And in case you're wondering, or if you're not aware, this is a list of the controls that get put in place on an endpoint when you deploy CIS level 1 STIG. We required level 2, which has more. And this also doesn't consider software needed for compliance, like our CMD reporter, now Jamf compliance reporter, our antivirus firewall. It's not considering OS updates and patching. There's controls in there that say you should update your OS, but it doesn't explain a lot. It's very vague. So pushing a button was out of the question. So what we decided to do was break down the controls using metrics and deploy in waves. We defined 3 metrics. And now, in order of our importance, based on our decisions, were user impact, ease of deployment, and level of security. So how much is this going to affect the user? We weighed this heavily in the beginning, so we decided to basically deploy all settings that didn't affect the user a lot in the beginning. How easy is it to deploy? Well, config profiles are pretty easy. Scripts are a lot harder, well, to some. AV installs are simple, but tuning them is really difficult and time-consuming. So you can push a package out, sure, but once it's out there, how good is it going to run on that machine? So, maybe not a good thing to do first. We also decided to say, well, if these three settings are in the same config profile, let's just add the rest that are also in there. So if we had a couple config profile settings that were in the same payload, and there was maybe one or two that were straggling outside, we would just toss it in if it's not too bad. And last, how much more secure is a device after implementation? Now, deploying a config to show a login window doesn't really make the device much more secure, but enforcing file vault does. So with metrics defined, we took a look at the settings we had to deploy and started scoring them. I'm using scoring in quotes there. We didn't have a number value associated with these. It was kind of an ad hoc scoring system, but if you needed to come up with your own numbers or scores, I'm sure you can. And there, you could use my little emojis there for the angry users or the easy as pie. Now we're getting into the real meat and potatoes. We took our metrics and we started plotting things out. I like a good graph. So this isn't every check. It's not even a quarter of them. So this was the idea, though. And you can see the legend at the bottom. So we grouped things as best we could where they fell in the chart here. So wave one, with my really ugly circles, was all the simple unobtrusive settings, lots of config profiles, silent agents that don't affect the user. So you now see CMD reporter or compliance reporter, and Splunk, our enterprise backup solution, also disabling sharing macOS in macOS. These are things that users won't really notice too much, save for the sharing maybe. And they also secure the device a lot, as you can see some of the size, the radius is the level of security. Wave two, a lot more configs, and now we're including some scripts in there, right? These are more user-facing changes and things that may upset the users. Disabling iCloud, changing browser settings. If you've never changed browser settings on a user or disabled iCloud from them, and you're lucky, they will get very angry if you do that. Now, finally, my very weird circle here, not a circle, I guess. Third wave are things that take time to do or will be very noticeable to the user. So things like our antivirus, unbinding the Macs so we can use ADE, automated device enrollment. We also use wave 3 for cleanup and adding anything we removed from previous waves based on user feedback. Notice I keep saying user feedback. We'll get into that. So now there are two here that are marked as project: EnforceOS updates and software patching. So we basically broke these down into their own subprojects with their own schedules. We knew that these would continue after the main secure project. So they were a mix of secure and enhance. When I go over to lessons learned, you'll see why this is very important. But these two basically ended up being their own projects inside this project. All right, we knew how many waves we needed. Now we made our basic timeline and start communicating things out. This timeline looks really simple, and if I made this when I was doing my project, I'd be very happy because there's not a lot in here. Well, to the unknowing eye, our actual timeline was very large with 4 streams and breakouts, and it was a little insane. But this is a nice, easy way to read it instead of seeing the one that I had. All right. This one I'd like everybody to pay attention for. A good communication plan is a requirement for successful deployment. And I'm going to repeat that just in case you missed it. A good communication plan is a requirement for a successful deployment. And this is a few pieces of advice with regards to creating an effective communication plan. So when communicating, make sure you let your users know about very noticeable changes and major policy changes. But don't let them know about everything. So, let them know like a login window privacy policy is coming, or we're installing a new application like a backup program or whatever. But you really don't need to tell them things like a log aggregator or your shell MOTD or a vulnerability scanning. You don't need to tell them that because they're not going to see it. It's not going to do anything for them. Your list is going to vary, of course, based on your user base, but we found that this was really useful. Now, you also want to send out the comms with enough time to take in the info and provide feedback for the users to take in info and provide feedback. Remember, even bad feedback is feedback, so you should take it all into consideration. So I'll give an example. We communicated out that we were disabling screen sharing using VNC in wave 1. We thought this is an easy win. Nobody's using VNC on macOS because the implementation is pretty insecure. So we received feedback though that a lot of people were using it for collaboration. So we gave the users on advice for new solutions. We told them why we're doing it, and we told them, hey, this is a good way to do it. And, here's some options. And we moved it to wave 2, and then the users were very happy. They got a better tool, and we were happy. We got the environment secured. It was a win-win. Now, one very important thing that gets overlooked, give the positive impacts of the change. Yep, you're taking things away. You're altering settings, you're probably closing things, but there are going to be positives to this, especially on your side, you're going to see it. Say something like, we're pushing an updated Office client to your machine so you can have all the most updated features and ensure you get the support you need. You don't need to say, we're pushing the Office client because the old one's deprecated, or we're pushing the old one, or we're updating it because of security updates. Another one, we're deploying Nomad to your machine so you can set your local password and to match your network password. You only need one password. Hey, you can set up your Mac off network. Awesome. You don't have to tell them, oh, I'm unbinding Active Directory and blah, 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 blah. Don't use that technical jargon if you don't need to. But remember, we are trying to rebuild relationships here. These users don't like us really. We're trying to make sure that they do. So this is a really good way to do that, is to have a really, really effective communication plan. All right, finally time. Implement the changes. You planned and you're ready for wave 1, right? So we're going to do all the things. All right, so you're prepping. So we use Jamf Pro for our deployment, of course. We actually use the Jamf CIS scripts, which were very customized for us with a bunch of checks and made different remediations based on different waves. So we broke the script apart into phases. This was before the macOS security compliance project. We use config profiles that were a mixture of using the built-in Jamf UI, which I do like, and using Profile Creator, or the later tool, which I really like, iMazing Profile Editor. I really can't recommend Profile Creator and iMazing Profile Editor enough. But if you're making custom configs, make sure you sign them before uploading to Jamf. And you will need custom profiles. So even though the Jamf UI has gotten better with custom applications and profiles, you will most likely need to make custom profiles for securing your environment based on whatever compliance you're going to use. We use various scripts found on Git provided by the community, and we also found we had to write our own, of course, and to limit some stopgaps. And some of our security vendors supplied packages and config profiles and scripts. Excellent. But please make sure you look at these before deployment. I use Suspicious Package by Mother's Ruin. Again, can't recommend it enough. I look at every vendor supplied package security vendor supplied package. I can't tell you how many times I've had to send packages back to them because they've had issues. So 100% look at your packages, look at the config profiles that are in there. So you got all this down, right? Who goes first? Any takers? No? Well, early adopters. They go first, right? Well, this is the first time we unfortunately talked about it, but you'll mention it. This is a really important slide. It's so important that when I was demoing this presentation to my partner, she told me, make it really stand out, because originally it was just a picture of something and it said early adopters. And she said, no, you need to focus on this. So I gave it its own slide with a little meme. So there you go. Find your early adopters early in the process. This will go into lessons learned, but I'm making sure you know it now. Find them early. Now get a good mixture of your user types. If you have a lot of devs and a few art directors, get a handful of devs and maybe one art director, or vice versa. But make sure you take a good percentage of your environment and directly email them and ask them if they can be an early adopter. So in our field, we have 17 early adopters, but we have a built-in testing group, IT. We have 17 users in the IT department that get things early as well. So they're really good early adopters, are IT people, because, hey, they're technical, they can get back to you. But whomever you choose, make sure you communicate and follow up. Make sure that they know they'll be getting changes before everyone else, maybe a week or two or so. And make sure that they know things may break, but also make sure that they have a direct line to you to immediately fix something if you break it. So always follow up with them, always ask for feedback, and always interact with them. These users are your last line of defense from pushing out a work-stopping change, and they can save your users, your entire environment, from disaster, and probably save you from losing your job if you push something out. All right, we have our waves. We have a revised timeline with early adopters and everyone and communication and all this other fun stuff, right? And this was kind of our final timeline. I mean, this is, again, a lot simpler, but our final timeline. And it worked. Great. By the numbers, yeah. End of the project. By the numbers, our rollout was a rousing success. We completed our project on time and under budget by about $48,000. We completed, now, one thing about that, we did complete Wave 2 much later than planned, but Wave 3 was completed before our deadline, so hey, we called it an overall success. But we did have one data loss incident. Now, we don't know if this was caused by user error or by the changes that we made in Wave 2, but we found it to be important enough to report on because it is something that you should know that could potentially happen if you're doing this. And thanks to our vulnerability scanning and patching, we saw a 75% decrease in vulnerabilities in the environment. So more on this. This is our actual vulnerability scan results. I'd remove the dates, but we went from a high of about 19.7 per endpoint when we only had about 223 in getting scanned to an average of about 4.25 on 392 devices. Now, note about some of these since there are weird patterns here and I kind of want to explain them. First is, this is old, so we have a lot more computers in this, and so the more devices you have, obviously, the more vulnerabilities you're going to have in your environment. But this weird one here, we found a vulnerability in one of our security softwares. It was patched, but you could see that it inflated those numbers a lot during that time. And then down here is the Apache vulnerability from macOS 10.14 and 10.15. Apple patched it after this, but the numbers are a little bit off. So, I believe that our ratio is a lot better than what it's stated here. But keep in mind, some of these are also right after an OS update was released or a Chrome 0 day was found again. But overall, very good numbers. And our vulnerability management team also agreed. They were very happy with these numbers. And we did this all without erasing computers. So what do we learn throughout the project, right? What could we do to make things better? What could we have done to make things better? First one, find your test group early. Can't stress it enough. Find and measure enrolling devices. And if you already had devices enrolled, find them now. And also, as I mentioned, patching ended up being a separate project, but we didn't realize it until a few months in. So we should have identified someone to tackle packaging software and updates instead of doing it ourselves and also securing the platform. So yes, part of the same goal. Patching takes a lot more time though, but you could very easily train someone on how to package software and deploy it, right? If you're lucky enough to have an operations team or an operations person, use them and start early. Now, this next one I didn't have time to get into today, but you should be providing KB articles and other support docs for your users and for your techs. If you think you have enough of them, you don't, write more. It's never enough. Can't tell you that enough. This is really important if you're introducing new applications or policies for your users and support staff. It's also a good time to mention, take the time to identify support champions. These are people who express interest in supporting Macs in your environment. This will help free you up from things like helping people with printers or other basic troubleshooting. You can retrain your staff if you already have a service desk. Just find people that want to help you. Now, we focused a lot on schedule, right? And because of this, we did have that data loss incident. So it's better to be late than wrong. We didn't know if that data loss incident was our fault, but we knew that we did rush some controls to get back onto schedule. And either way, we could have changed things when it happened. We did afterward, but just know that it is better to be late than wrong. And that last bullet point there, well, that's more for big corporations, right? Don't ignore your Macs. Invest in them. If you have Macs already, the longer you ignore them, the harder and more expensive it becomes to fit them in your environment. Thanks for listening. And here are some resources.